Okay, so now we're getting into the Nixon presidency. He was president from 1969 to 1974. Again, this is only 5 years, so obviously we know that he was president for 4 years and then he got reelected and then something happened for him to be out of office earlier. Now, imperial presidency. Imperial, we see this word and we think king, right? Ancient China, maybe. Imperial presidency. It says he increased presidential powers since the Great Depression. And we know the president of the Great Depression was FDR and how people believed he was slowly becoming a monarch with so much government control over people. It peaked under Richard M. Nixon, imperial presidency. He failed to consult Congress about the bombings in Cambodia. He used public funds to remodel his private homes. He used the CIA and the FBI to collect information on his political enemies, and he refused to spend funds on programs allowed by Congress. So here you can see how he is taking in too much power. Now, domestic policy. Domestic meaning, again, what we do here at home in the United States. He moved the country in a more conservative direction. He eliminated several Great Society programs, Great Society being LBJ's programs, and he wanted to put an end to the draft. The draft being the selective service in which people were randomly selected to go to war. He also created a series of strong anti-crime laws, against crime laws. He wanted to advance a strong environmental program, and he had a conservative philosophy. Now, First Amendment rights. Under Nixon, he had to deal with two different First Amendment rights. Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969, was about student protesting. John Tinker and his sister were suspended from school for wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. Can you do that or can't you do that if it's going to be part of your First Amendment? The Supreme Court voted in favor for student rights, that you can protest the war in a non-disturbing way, and wearing black armbands is not going to disturb anybody or disrupt education. Now, in Wisconsin versus Yoder, 1972, it says the United States Supreme Court struck down a Wisconsin state law that required Amish children to attend school beyond 8th grade. It violated the parents' freedom of religion. So basically, if you don't want to send your students to school based on your religion, then you didn't have to. So after 8th grade, the parents were able to take their kids out because of their religious beliefs. Okay, that's Wisconsin versus Yoder. Now, the EPA was created by Richard M. Nixon. The Environmental Protection Agency was created to protect the environment. It set air and water pollution standards for cities and engages in monitoring and enforcement activities. And citizens can now file lawsuits against polluters under the EPA. Right, so again, environment protection. He also passed the Endangered Species Act in 1973. The law required the Fish and Wildlife Service to list species of plants and animals that are threatened with extinction and then take further steps to protect them, right? So if any animals on the endangered species and you really can't kill them, you have to let them reproduce so that way it can, the species can continue. And that's what he does here, the Endangered Species Act. Now you're going to have the Equal Rights Amendment. Equal rights. Who wants equal rights? We're going to go back to women. Women wanting equal rights. In 1923, it was introduced by Alice Paul, suffragist leader and founder of the National Women's Party. 1972, amendment was approved by Congress but fell short in the support needed for ratification. Now there are going to be some females that are going to go against the Equal Rights Amendment. Phyllis Schlafly was a critic of the women's liberation movement. Basically, she said it reduced the rights of wives and it harmed the family life because now the mothers weren't going to be at home to take care of their kids. It might lead to unisex restrooms, right? Restrooms that were shared by men and women, right? If everybody's equal, everybody's the same. It required women to serve combat roles, right? Combat roles. So these are reasons why the Equal Rights Amendment should not have been passed. And again, the females were the ones kind of opposed to this amendment. Foreign policy under Nixon. The reopening of China with China in 1972 and 1949, China becomes communist. The United States does not establish relationships with communist governments. So we kind of block them out of our foreign policy. In 1972, Nixon becomes the first president to visit mainland China. This is the greatest foreign policy achievement in U.S. history, right? For us to be able to go into China. Detente with the Soviet Union in 1972. Detente means relaxing of tensions, right? Tensions are going to calm down, especially after Kennedy, where it's just absolutely crazy with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now it becomes more relaxed. They wanted to halt the buildup of nuclear weapons. 1972, Nixon becomes the first president to visit Moscow, which is the capital of the Soviet Union. They signed SALT, S-A-L-T, right? Just like the movie, right, with Angelina Jolie. It's an agreement with Soviet leaders limiting the development of defensive missile systems. And the United States sold American grain to cope with food shortages in the Soviet Union. So we sold them wheat. Okay? So here we become on friendlier terms. Now, Ford takes office as vice president in 1973. Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned when it was discovered that he had taken bribes while serving as governor of Maryland. And under the 25th Amendment, Nixon appoints Gerald Ford, Michigan congressman, as his new vice president. Watergate crisis. Of course, there's always going to be drama. In 1972, a group of ex-CIA agents were caught breaking in to Democratic headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. The cover-up. Nixon said it was on the grounds of national security. Two investigative reporters were the first to report possible links between the break-in and the White House. The Senate appointed a committee to investigate. Going back to the United States people not trusting the government, the 1960s and 1970s, where we had a lot of investigative reporters who were not afraid to call out the government in any wrongdoings. So here you're going to have these two ex-CIA agents that break into the Democratic Party headquarters, and Nixon, he is a Republican. So he's actually, kind of that corrupt person trying to find out any dirt on his opposition. Now the Watergate tapes. It says the presidential aide stated Nixon was involved and he had secretly recorded all of his own White House conversations. The Senate asked to listen to the tapes and Nixon refused, claiming executive privilege. So what does that mean? He says, I'm the president, I don't have to listen to you because I am the president and I don't have to listen to what the Senate is asking for or the Supreme Court is asking for. You can't do anything to me, I am the president. So here you're going to have a court case. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court in 1974. The United States versus Nixon, right? The Supreme Court versus the president. If he obeyed the district court, then it violated the separation of powers in the Constitution. Going back to constitutional powers and separation of powers and checks and balances, everybody's going to balance each other. No one person is going to have more power than the other. The Supreme Court stated Nixon had to turn over the tape since no one person is above the law, and he did. However, there was a lot of discrepancies and a lot of information that was cut out of those tapes. Nixon resigns. He basically quits before he gets fired as president. The tapes were made public. It turns out that Nixon was involved in the break-ins. The House of Representatives moved to impeach Nixon, and Nixon becomes the first president to resign. And basically he kept saying, I am not a crook. I am not a crook, when we know that he really was. The impact of Nixon's presidency, he lowered the public confidence in government. Of course, now it's very negative. You don't know who to trust. Presidential powers could lead to abuse. Two-party system works, right? The two parties, Democrats versus Republican, it has to work because that way one party is always checking on the other one. It reaffirmed the role of the press being the media, the newspapers, the radio, the TV, and how we can use information to bring that to the people. Supreme Court preserved independence, and Congress passed new laws to curb the presidential powers. Okay, so this is the importance of Nixon's presidency. If you have any questions, let me know.